So welcome for this talk about Spring Boot and DevOps. It's not my first appearance at JEEConf, but perhaps you don't know me, everyone. So I'm Nicolas Fränkel. I'm a developer and an architect. I've always worked as a consultant for different customers, banks, insurance, public sector, retail, what have you. I'm teacher and trainer. I'm blogger. I'm also a book author. My first book is about Vardin, the Vardin web framework, which I've talked about last year. And my last book is about integration testing. And this I've talked when I was at Java Day here in Kiev. So to the subject at hand, I will talk about Spring Boot, but in the DevOps context. So in this talk, what is DevOps? Is it about developers and ops collaboration? It will be hard since it's technical talk. Is it treating your infrastructure as code? Not really. Is it to automate everything? Still no. In this talk, for me, DevOps, I will focus on providing health checks and metrics through Spring Boot. And let's have a little story, which doesn't end nicely, as you can see. So you're a developer, you finished your project, you're very happy, you're calling your project manager and telling him that your project is finished. It tells you, well, just tell the ops to deploy it in production. So you're calling the ops guy, and you're very happy because you've externalized every property in a configuration file, you've documented everything in a production leaflet, and so you're all set. And when you tell that to the op guy, he's very happy, and he asks you, okay, that's good. Tell me just how I can monitor your application. Monitor my application. Yes, ops guys do need to monitor your application. So you're a little embarrassed. And basically, to get out of this situation, awkward situation, you have basically three options. The first option is to get back to the project manager to tell him, you know, about the stuff. Yeah, well, we cannot publish yet, we cannot deploy. Just give me 2 or 3 more weeks, and I will develop something ad hoc, and it will be set. So probably these won't make you very popular with your project manager because they don't like asking for more budget. And even though they didn't put it in the specification that you will need to monitor the application, well, it's expected. The second possibility, second alternative, there are still seats in the front rows, is to push to the ops guy and say, you know, you have no choice. My project manager is very important. This project is very important. So deploy it to the production environment and be done with it. And of course, if this happens, if your project is really important and you need it to be deployed in production, the ops guy will comply. But what will happen if there is something happening, something wrong, is you will be the one waken up at 3 AM in the morning to read the stack trace in production. The final option is, well, it's Friday evening, and guess what? You have the weekend. Great. So you know what you will do the weekend. And yeah, I don't know if this little story is familiar to anyone. Great. Yeah, none of the 3 options are really, yeah, very nice options. I don't like any of them. And the funny stuff is we have these recurring needs of monitoring our application. And every time, first, it's never written in the specification because project manager don't care about, you know, IT stuff. It's your problem, it's not there. So specification, the requirements are only business requirements, not technical requirements. And the second stuff is every time, for every new application, we have to create the same stuff. And that is just horrible, it's time wasting, it's uninteresting. So what can we do? So as I said, for non-functional requirements, you have this monitoring, and for monitoring, basically you have 2 stuff. The first stuff is health checks. Health checks are basically a way of making sure that your application runs. So it can run on multiple nodes, it's not the problem, but does your application provide the service? And in order to check that, basically, you have dependency in your application. The most common dependency is the database, but nowadays you might have web services, REST, SOAP, you might have GMS queues, you might have many different stuff. So your application can only run if all those dependencies run. So as soon as one dependency is down, your application cannot run. So wouldn't it be nice to have a little nice dashboard that you can say, okay, I have this dependency, this dependency, this dependency, and that run the web page, and every time you check the web page, then there is a little test, and you check the dependency each time. It already happened to me that I had to do this manually. It's not very funny. The other stuff is, even though all your dependency may run, in fact, you might find yourself, for reasons that are completely independent of the on your application, for example, from the infrastructure point of view, that your application becomes quite slow. So the health checks will return you that, yeah, I run fine, but even though you are not running really fine. So we might want to measure response time and stuff like that. Of course, if you are running a Spring application, you might also want to check other stuff, such as beans, property values, controller mappings, everything running fine. I guess I've talked enough, and now I will do a little demo for you. So what I've checked is there is something called the pet clinic. Who knows about the pet clinic? It's a very famous Spring application. Great. And someone was kind enough to migrate it to Spring Boot. Isn't it nice? So now what we can do is we just can run the Spring Boot application by just launching the command line, and we will try to launch the web application. I'm sorry, it takes a little time, but not like 20 minutes. It's just during the course of a talk, it's just a little long. Yeah, it's done. Now we can go onto the Spring Pet Clinic and check. There is this little, don't forget about it. It's the implementation. Okay, now I'm logged into my Spring Pet Clinic, and as the Spring Pet Clinic goes, you can have the home, you can search for owner, you can add new owner, you can check for veterinarians, you can check that your error mapping is good. There are also some magic in the inbox. So this is the application as it is. And I want, as a developer, to have metrics and health checks in 5 minutes. So that's very hard requirements. And Spring Boot gives us those little starters. So starter web, starter time leaf, data GPA. And there is one very important. And if you remember one thing about this presentation, is to just add the Spring Boot starter actuator. So when I restart now my application, and it still takes some time, not so much, but a little. Yeah. I was too fast, okay. And now, if I just try to do this, I've got stuff. And if I try to do this, I also have got some stuff. So it's less than 5 minutes. Okay? And so that my weekend is now saved. It's not everything, but just by doing that, I added HealthCheck and metrics to my Spring Boot application. So you might object that, of course, it's not very readable. So what I will do is just do a copy-paste, because I'm quite lazy. And yeah, you know, generally speaking, people who are lazy try to optimize their time and make very good software developers. And when I restart the application, Now it should be gone. No, no. Yes, much better. So what do you see? You have some dumb metrics. You have the memory free, processor uptime. Now let's go onto the application and check. When I go onto home, for example, and let's have some errors and find owners and veterinarians, and let's back to the metrics. I've got more metrics. And basically, I've got the number of time that a particular mapping return a 200 HTTP code. And I also have the last time it took to render the response time of the metrics or the OOP star mapping, just out of the box. I've still only added the actuator starter. So that's quite good. Now, if I go to the HealthCheck, yeah, it's nicely formatted. We can also see that when I do the request, I've got a 200 code. So it says it's up, and I've got 200 code. Now I will add a new dependency. And basically this dependency, I won't configure it, and it will be a GMSQ. I think this one. And now if I restart again, so I configure nothing, and this starter. Could someone please answer? So if I start again, please again and again and again. Yes. Okay, great. So I've added a new dependency, which requires an infrastructure dependency. In this case, it's a Solar server. So it requires a Solar server. I didn't configure the Solar server. So what it's telling me is, okay, you've got out of the box, you required this dependency, it's down. Okay? So the whole stuff now is marked as down, and the status is marked as 5 or something. So you don't need your op guys to scrap the JSON. You can just check the HTTP code. So that's very cool, out of the box. Now I will remove this dependency, and I will hack my own, because it's not as easy, you know, sometimes. Let's say I want to use a web service, and this web service I might also want to mark it as a dependency. So I will say it's a health configuration. I will use the add configuration annotation. I will create a new method. It will return something called the health indicator. And health indicator, I don't forget to say this is a bean, because if I don't do it, it won't be taken. And now I can return a new health indicator. So the health indicator takes as a method which must return health. Since I don't know about Java 8, I will just return it like this, with detail, reason, and I don't know, something weird happen. Of course, you can have a different message, but for the sake of this presentation, this will be more than enough. Guess what? I will have to restart. Yeah, I will have to restart each time, and each time I will tell you it's taking a little long. I'm sorry. So if anyone knows a good joke during the meantime, just to, yeah, I don't know, entertain us. So you can create your own health checks. So this is something which is very, very, very valuable for your ops. Because in one page, they can check the status of your application and, yeah, take measures. Okay. So this was the demo. This is the talk that goes with it. So it checks, wraps a dependency. And of course, it can be a data source. It can be a web service. It can be anything. And you can define what you want to check. For example, checking that you can ping the database might be enough. But checking that you can effectively get a connection out of your database and through this connection make a select dual from dual is a little more advanced. So you have also to define what depth of your check will be. So each check that you define must return a health object, and the status of the health object is basically very easy. Either it's up and your application is up and running, or it's down and application cannot run. And of course, I encourage you when it's down to provide either the exception stack trace or a relevant message. And some health checks are very easy to provide. Some health checks might be a little more complex. At this point, once you've defined all your health checks, Spring Boot will scrap them, and when you enter the health endpoint, will test them each in turn and return you an integrated view of the whole health checks. So, as I said, if only one is down, the page returns a nice 5 or something error HTTP code. So, sorry? No, there was no question. Okay. So the bean must implement the health indicator, and it's done. So now, who knows about the Dropwizard metrics? Not so many. Great, that's good. So you were right to come here. So the Dropwizard metrics is a model, just a simple API to model metrics. And of course, it provides you with different kind of metrics. It also provides you with exporters and much more that are too much to reference in this talk. And there are two simple metrics that we already saw. It's the gauge. So the gauge is a value. For example, the response time of the page has been a gauge. And there is also something called a counter. And a counter is a little different from a gauge because gauge metrics are completely independent from one another, whereas counters just are the same value as the previous one plus one. Yeah, counter, so you count plus one, plus one, plus one. And the Dropwizard library gives us also nice reporters. Because most of the time, your ops just don't want to scrape a JSON page. They already have their own tool. For example, one of such tool is GMX. Who knows about GMX? Great. So every JVM has its own GMX engine, and you can send metrics and read metrics from there. And also there is an ops tool called Graphite where you can have a nice diagram with dots. So for the JEEConsole first, this is the view that you will get from JEEConsole. So basically you've got in a tree way all your metrics. And how can we achieve the same with Spring Boot? Well, that's quite easy. So when I say that's quite easy, don't believe me, try it yourself. But I think it's very, very, very easy. So what I will do is to add a dependency to metrics core from IO Dropwizards, and I'm done. The only thing I have to do now is to go into the config, create a new metrics configuration. I don't forget to set the configuration annotation. And now I say bean public gmx reporter, gmx reporter. So gmx reporter dot for registry dot build. And this is a new reporter. And this reporter I don't forget, this is very important, this is something very stupid, but you have to do, is to start it, and then you return it. If you just return it, it won't work. And here, we see that for registry static method is expecting a metrics registry. And we are taking advantage of Spring Boot, which is very smart, because as soon as Spring Boot or the actuator starter detected we added the Dropwizard metrics into our class path, it created for us a metric registry bin like that, thanks to auto configuration. So we just need to get a reference on this bin, and it can be done with the auto wired and just say metric registry. So now Spring Boot will inject it, and it's done. I will again restart and rerun. So this is something which is very powerful in Spring Boot, is that if you provide a starter which is very well configured and you provide your own dependency, magically the code is already present for you to use. Now if I'm going into metrics, so I still have my metrics there, so they are published, but I will just try to do some endpoint first, like so if I launching the JEEConsole, so here we can see we have the same metrics. And let's take, for example, the roots, which has 2 in count. If I just try to get home again, and I make refresh, where do I refresh this stuff? Here, it's free. So it's really the metrics that are sent to GMX. And at this point, your ops will be very, very happy. And you, basically, I've spent 20 minutes. So you can still go on weekend. But you can go further to make them even more happier. So I just mentioned something called graphite. And this graphite stuff basically lets you have nice diagrams with plots and stuff, and you can render this kind of stuff on demand. So what I will do is I will send my metrics to Graphite now. So just for the record, here is a Graphite browser. Okay. So what I did is just I have a Vagrant, a virtual machine, and I started Graphite on it. It's also something I took on GitHub, so if you ever have to do a presentation, check on GitHub. Probably everything is there for you to use. So I want to send everything in Graphite. What I need to do right now is just to add a new dependency. Because the Dropwizard metrics library is very well modularized, so I will add the Graphite stuff. Now, because I don't forget about it, I will stop it. I will do some more code. So, public. No, oh no, it's not in this one, I'm sorry. This one I don't touch until the end of the presentation, it's this one. So here I will create now a Graphite report. And it's good because it's very, very easy. It's exactly the same way of creating the stuff. There is a static method. So now we know that we have to give it a registry. And we will just have some prefix because as you might have seen here, Graphite displays metrics in a three-way. So we will prefix everything with boot, and we will build with a Graphite sender. So that is something we have to create. So Graphite sender, sender equals new Graphite. And the Graphite object takes two parameters. The first is your daemon, the second is your port. And I know that my Graphite is expecting to get input on port 2003. So likewise, we don't forget to start it. And in this case, we have to tell it how frequently we will send metrics to Graphite. So I think that every half second is good enough. And here probably I'm all set. I'm very lucky because so far my demo ran without glitch. I hope it won't bring me unluck if I say that. So now I can again browse it's just to get some metrics. And now I can check that. So let's say I will select recent data, and I say I want to see the past 10 minutes, and here I started getting my metrics. Oh, you don't see anything. Hey, no one told me that you don't see the right end of the screen. Come on, guys. What are you doing? Are you sleeping? Now I understand why everyone was looking at me like, but there is nothing there. Stop trying to convince us. Okay. So now, yeah, again, I can browse a little, veterinarians, owner, find owner, get next page, back to search. Sorry, I can quit JEEConsole, though the results are still there. And I can ask it to say last 10 minutes. Much better. Now, are you convinced now? Okay, so basically, in half an hour, even I took the time to talk to you meanwhile, I provided metrics and health checks to a normal Spring Boot application that was not meant to apply those kind of changes. So in half an hour, I gave you a weekend free. How good is that? Okay. Of course, for development, this is not very interesting to send stuff to Graphite because, for example, if I stop Graphite, where is it? It's here. So now I'm stopping my VM, which will stop Graphite too. Okay, and if I now start to browse the application, probably what will happen is I will get plenty of stack trace because, of course, Spring Boot is trying to send data to Graphite, and Graphite doesn't answer anything. So that is not very practical to do in a normal development environment because probably you don't want to have Graphite. So you have two different ways of doing that. The first is who knows about the at conditional in Spring? The annotation at conditional? No, it's my accent, or people don't know about it? No? Okay. So basically, it's a very good annotation. because it enables you to have conditional logic in your configuration. Basically, what usually people will do is they will create a method, and inside the method they will say, if some condition, then return this bean, otherwise then return this bean. I must say that this is the worst. It works. This is the worst you can do because configuration is not meant to have this kind of logic inside. What you want to do is to have something which is very readable and to have the simplest logic possible. So you can put conditional annotation on beans and say, okay, this bean will only be instantiated with Spring if this condition is met, and you have a limited set of conditions. For example, you have conditional if some class is found of the class path, if some class is not found of the class path, if some bean is in the bean factory, if some bean is not in the bean factory. So you will say, okay, if in this case, I will have a bean that will be activated only if my profile, for example, dev profile is activated. And your production bean will be set at conditional only if the previous bean has not been instantiated. So by default, you won't have a profile, so you will have your production bean, otherwise you will have your normal bean. So this is a way. Basically, what we are doing at my customer site is we are not using that. We are sending everything to GMX, and we have a dedicated infrastructure that basically reads the data from GMX and puts it in Graphite, and it's called GMX Trends. So it's also a very good way to do it. My final words would be that be very, very wary that, you know, project managers are very set on the success of their project, but most of them forget that, yeah, metrics are not only technical. So operational guys will ask for metric, but business might also ask for metric. And in this case, you can do exactly the same that you've done for technical metrics for business metrics. Of course, there are plenty of products that will allow you to send metrics to business metrics. I mean, I know about Adobe Tag Manager, there is Google Analytics, there are plenty of stuff. But it's all web-oriented. So if you are using the web, it's good. If you are using a native application, it might not be so good. And yeah, each one will send its data to a dedicated place. If you put your metrics logic on the server side, it might be also interesting. So this is also an option. I've put the references of the Graphite Vagrant's virtual machine that I've used, and also the enhanced Spring Pet Clinic, so the pet clinic with Spring Boot. I guess we have some time from some Q&A. Questions are welcome. Yeah. So the question is, I have shown the Dropwizard metrics, and if there is anything like this in Spring Boot directly. No, but why should we? You've got else checks also in Dropwizard. So basically for me, there is already a duplication because you've got the else indicator in Spring Boot. I think that in earlier version of the Spring Actuator, it only relied on Dropwizard. But you know, as soon as I get my Dropwizard metrics under class path, I've got the metric registry for free. So I don't really need something inside. Yeah.
Everything looks very good, like a magic, but nothing.
It is magic.
It is magic, but I believe that nothing comes in for free. In what cost really performance can be worsened by some additional dependency like HealthCheck and so on? It should be.
Is your question oriented toward performance, toward maintainability? Nothing is free, but what is the real cost of that? In which context are you asking me that? Is it the time it took me to develop it? 30 minutes while talking to you. So basically 30 minutes, it's nothing. Performance-wise, of course, it costs you a little lot, but a little bit. A little lot is not very nice, yeah. A little bit. Sending metrics to GMX is also basically cost-free. The JVM itself does it on its own. Sending stuff to Graphite, it sends UDP packet, so it's asynchronous. Probably there is a little overhead, but what I explained is probably what you will end up doing. You will be sending stuff to GMX, and something will scrap stuff from GMX and put it in Graphite. So it's also not, it's completely independent from your application. And
what about the increase in memory requirements?
okay, you might want to get into the subject, and to be honest, I have no idea. What I know is what it will cost you if you don't do it. No, but you know, you can always be very picky about, oh, but you know, I've got 1 or 2 or 3 or 5% overhead in some cases when you do like inline monitoring of your application with tools that use Java agent and stuff. And of course, it will cost you a little always. But I prefer to always pay this cost than having no visibility on what I'm doing. Because that's the problem. I prefer to be a little more load and to add a little more memory because, yeah, infrastructure is very cheap. Because visibility is something which is invaluable. Knowing what you do is very, very valuable. And I guess when I was younger, because I have gray hair, when I was younger, you know, there were developers and operation. And we hated each other. Because, you know, those operational guy always asked us about stupid stuff that we didn't care about. You know, when we shipped, it was done. And of course, the operational guy saw us shipping them really shitty application that they couldn't maintain. I guess this is becoming better. And yeah, you have to care for the other, you know, you have to be kind to the other party. And I think Spring Boot is a really good product because basically it costs you nothing. No, in development time, it costs you nearly nothing. During the course of a project, 30 minutes is nothing. And it helps them really, really, really much. So if you want to really be sure about what it costs you in terms of memory and CPU, I encourage you to do your own benchmark. Because as someone told us this morning, you know, it really depends on your context.
In what cases do you recommend to use Spring Boot itself? I mean, the types of the project.
Are you already using Spring?
Yeah.
So you should, because there is no good reason not to use it. If you are already using Spring, you might as well use Spring Boot. The thing is, it will kickstart your project much faster. Then at some point you will notice, I want to configure it, and then probably the time you gained at the start, you will lose it afterwards. But in the end, it will be exactly the same. And then you've got all the starters. Starter GPA, starter actuator, starter web. You know, to set up a Spring project normally takes, between half and a full day, depending on the complexity. With Spring Boot, basically you just say, I want this dependency on web, on GPA, and you've got your project running. So I would say always use Spring Boot. I see you frowning. So is my answer not clear enough? Or perhaps I misunderstood your question.
Well, sometimes we use, well, Spring Boot itself, as I understand, it relies only on its own infrastructure. I mean, you develop a project only using Spring and stuff related to Spring. But in some cases, you want to use some particular application servers or...
Yeah, you can do it. Nothing. When you use Spring Boot, you have to think that it's not because you use Spring Boot that you will use the embedded Tomcat container, for example. You can configure Spring Boot to create a war. And then it's like any other war. You just take your war with all its dependency in WebFlip and put it into the container you want.
Okay.
Oh, okay. That's okay. Now I understand your point. No, Spring Boot doesn't force you to use the embedded container. It just enables you to use out of the box a container, the Tomcat container, but it doesn't force you to do anything. And that's the great strength of Spring Boot. You can use it in many, many contexts.
Okay. Do you use metrics out of the box, or do you configure some additional metrics? What do you use? Spring Boot as well with configurable metrics or some other service?
In my context, I will be very honest, we don't use the Spring Boot itself. So I had to hack and to use Dropwizard metrics.
Do you use Spring?
Yeah, I use Spring. I'm using, yeah. And that's why I'm doing this talk, because I said, but I have to hack everything out of the box, whereas I could just use Spring Boot. Yeah. So I had to hack everything, get the dependency on the Dropwizard's API, then create some AOP stuff to, yeah, each time there was a request, send the metrics. It's really bothersome. I would sooner use something like this, but yeah. You know, each of us has his own constraint regarding the projects.
So basically you have calls to Dropwizard
yeah.
API.
Yeah. Yeah, I wrapped the API so as to be very, very clear-cut. Any other questions? Okay, so this is true. What I didn't show here is that by default, your administrative endpoints are protected. I protected by what you want. By default, basically when Spring Boot starts, it will give you a login password, and the password will be each time will be new. Of course, this is a good default, but it's not really what you want. So you can configure Spring Security to protect the same endpoint. If I can hack something real quick, if I have some time. 1 minute, 1 minute. In 1 minute I can do it. Okay, let's try. Yeah, no, I will do it. I want to convince you that it's very, very good, very, very nice. 1 minute, 1 minute. Yes, security enabled, context path. So first I will say that, then I will say that. Up. Okay, 1 minute and counting. 50 seconds. But I didn't prepare it, so if it fails, I'm sorry. Huh? So the first thing is probably here. Now we've got our manage metrics. No, sorry, metrics. Yes. So now I've got all my endpoints isolated under the same mapping, and then I can protect them with Spring Security or whatever. Okay. Thank you very much for your attention, and see you soon.